everybody. Welcome. I'm Charles E. Smith Jr., and this is an Inside Sports production, and this is our special presentation of Talkin Hockey. Before we go ahead and start, I just wanted to thank our sponsors here, thepuckshopshere.com. You can go there, and not only do they have the best prices available on hockey gear online, but also enter the promo code Inside Sports. Upon checkout, you'll receive an additional 10% discount. And of course, I have to thank Google Voice as well, making it possible for me to have my guest on from Toronto, all the way from Toronto, without it costing me an arm and a leg. So let me go ahead and get him introduced here. My special guest is Lonnie the Schwartz, and he mixes fanboy enthusiasm with journalistic integrity, creating the most unique interviews in the game today. Lonnie caught his first game at age 5 at the Montreal Forum when the Canadiens took on the Buffalo Sabres, and has been playing hockey as a goalie since age 6. That's almost 30 years of pucks to the head, if anyone is counting. And, you know, I've met Lonnie, and I have been counting, and I can say that he seems to have taken a puck to the head or two. So let's go ahead, without further ado. Lightning Lonnie Schwartz. How you doing, Lonnie?
I'm great, Charles. Thanks for having me on today, man. Real pleasure.
All right, and let's go ahead and start. Now, you are a goaltender, born,
Yes,
bred,
sir.
and raised. And, you know, let's go ahead and talk with you a little bit just about hockey54.com. And I've seen you doing some of those interviews, and I must say they are rather unique. But hockey54.com, just a little bit, when did that start, and what can people find there?
Well, you started the site. Not you, I did. I started the site along with hockey girl Dahlia Kurtz about almost 3.5 years ago at this point, and really got our footing when we went out to Vegas for the NHL awards, and we've been there for the last 3 awards in Vegas. So we go there, we do our interviews, we go to some NHL events throughout the year, some NHL alumni events too, even some cool celebrity-related events, and really awesome that our sponsor Booster Juice gets us out to these events too. So we've been able to get really unique interviews with hockey players, even Jose Bautista, and that's our version up here in Canada. That's our version of the Grammys. And you can also go to our forums and check out the interviews, writers. It's basically an all-in-one stop for all things hockey, and you get, in my estimation, the most unique and best interviews in the game today.
Okay, all right, perfect. You know, I always thought I did the most unique and best, but I saw you at the awards show. In fact, that's where we met. This show that we're doing has been a long time coming, because we talked about this, I think, 2 award shows ago. And finally, some 2.5 years later, we're getting this thing underway.
Finally, the Schwartz has come to Inside Sports. Sorry,
All right.
my little shout-out to The Rock.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm here on the West Coast in Southern California. You're there in Toronto, which is, as we all know, the center of the hockey universe. The trade deadline is coming up. All-Star game has passed. It's time to get down to serious hockey. Some contenders and pretenders out there in the East. First of all, let's go ahead and start with one of the teams that was supposed to do a lot better than they are. And, you know, I normally don't believe in curses and things like that. I just think they're silly superstitions. But if you have any theories on the Buffalo Sabres actually being cursed, I'm willing to listen at this point.
Maybe if you're going to go the superstitious route, it's because the Memorial Auditorium was torn down, I think, within the last year. And it was, of course, right across the way from, the Niagara Union Bank now?
Right.
Arena, or whatever rotating name it is. Maybe the magic from the Memorial Auditorium has finally lost its luster now that it's been torn down brick by brick.
Well,
and
possibly,
that's kind of sad, actually.
Possibly, that's what happened in Montreal. They have not won a cup since the old Montreal Forum was abandoned. So, it could be something like that working there.
Don't even get me started on the Forum. That could be a half-hour discussion on itself. But there in Buffalo, you have, as we were talking about before, we were talking about Ryan Miller, who proved to be almost a world beater at the Olympics in Vancouver, and was the best goaltender, unanimously named best goaltender of the Olympics, and already has a Vezina under his belt. And you'd think with a backstop like that maybe he'd be the guy, the cornerstone, but now it's looking as though with concussions and other injuries that he hasn't been able to maintain that consistency and momentum that you really do need as a goaltender in the National Hockey League to keep that elite level status you once had. So
Exactly.
you don't want to blame it solely on injuries, but the poor guy hasn't been able to stay healthy long.
Well, but one of the things that always a little bit irked me about Ryan Miller was, to me, he had big games, but he didn't necessarily have his biggest games in the biggest moments. And to me, that's the test of really when you look at the quote-unquote elite goaltenders. When you go through the years with your, if you want to go back to Billy Smith, then come forward to Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, even Tim Thomas last year, to me, epitomized what it is to be in big-time goaltending. Tim Thomas was not great the whole playoffs, but every single game they needed to win, all those game sevens and overtime, he won all of those. So he stepped up big when he needed to. Ryan Miller, to me, it seems like his great games, they just kind of happen. Could be in game 1 of a playoff series, could be in game 3, it might be in a regular season, but the moment never seems to dictate how well he plays. And that, to me, is the trademark of a true elite goaltender.
And I couldn't agree more with that statement. I mean, you look at, like you said, the guys you named, when it really mattered. Billy Smith was not the greatest regular season goaltender.
Right.
But when it came playoff time, he was the man to help the Islanders create that dynasty. But I will say this much. In this day and age, obviously, dynasties aren't exactly 4 in a row. It could be 2, maybe 3 over the span of 6 or 7 years where you show how elite a team truly is.
Correct.
But let me put this one out there. And I think this is a guy that, bears discussion is Nikolai Khabibulin. Nikolai Khabibulin was pegged as one of those goaltenders who was lights out during, the regular season, but come postseason, he wasn't doing it when it mattered. And then all of a sudden, come to Tampa Bay, he wins a cup. So it finally took time for him to reach that level where it was showing that, yes, Nikolai Khabibulin is an elite goaltender, not just in the regular season, but in the postseason as well. Not that the Lightning created any kind of dynasty, and quite frankly could be one of the biggest surprise failures of the Eastern Conference this year. Maybe they overachieved last year, I don't know, but when you have Stamkos, St. Louis, and LeCavalier leading that team,
right,
you should have much, much better results than what you've got going on. Never mind Stevie Y as your general manager.
Well, right. Well, and true, if we move on to Tampa Bay over there in the Eastern Conference, as we continue here on Hockey Talk, right here on Inside Sports, Tampa Bay, and I think they should have shored up their goaltending situation, though. We were talking about goaltenders. It kind of comes back to that. I don't want to put it all on the goaltending, but when you look at that, even if they were to somehow get into the postseason, do they have the strength between the pipes to really make any type of a run?
Oh, boy. Matthew Gaudin has been a proven backup goaltender
right.
for many, many years in the National Hockey League. And Dwayne Roloson, I think I'm right here with the statistic. He is the last remnant of the 80s, in today's NHL. Okay, so this is a guy who's been in the National Hockey League for the better part of 20-plus years now. And God love the guy, but again, here's another tender who's probably past his due. And we wanted to talk about, goaltenders going to certain markets. I can't imagine another market beyond Tampa Bay that really, really needs that goaltending help. I mean, Chicago's in a slump. I get that. And New Jersey, without question, does need a new stud goaltender because Martin Brodeur is 39 and Hedberg is 38.
Well,
so
when you look at that,
they need someone who's going to come in.
Let me just interrupt you here for just a sec. Dwayne Roloson, and that's where I think that Tampa made a huge mistake. I know what Dwayne Roloson did in the playoffs last year, but the guy was 41 last year. So he obviously is at the point now where he can't carry the mail. It's one thing, every single night anyways, it would be one thing if you could rest him during the regular season a little bit and then maybe have a run at the end, which is what he did last year. But expecting him to play a full load of games at this age, I think is a bit unrealistic.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think last year was the last hurrah, and now this year during the regular season, it's just not happening for him. And you want to see a guy try and leave on top, but then again, as most athletes do, they have some trouble walking away from what their livelihood's been and what they identify themselves with. So who do you fill that space with, though? And And you look at the guys that are technically available, if you will, as backup goaltenders, or even as some people would consider 1Bs.
Right.
You've got a guy like Josh Harding in Minnesota, who's proven to be an excellent goaltender when a guy like Backstrom is down. Although the Wild started hot this year and they've kind of fizzled, Josh Harding is a guy that can fill the role. Corey Schneider is clearly the biggest name on the market in terms of goaltenders that are available, and he's a West Coast. And I always hate that. Let's not trade within conference or division, but when you truly look at it, you've got guys like Harding, Schneider, and Anders Lindback who are available. And think about this, too. Brian Elliott has been playing out of this world this year, and he's shown some flashes of brilliance in the past, but this year it looks like it's truly consistent. And if there's ever the definition of a 1A, 1B situation, it's in St. Louis right now. And maybe does that make Halak expendable yet again? So who knows? But those are three names that you could look at from the Western Conference that could make a trip to Tampa Bay and almost instantly make a difference on a team that should be doing more than they are right now. Because with that kind of offense, and yeah, I know they've had some difficulties on the blue line this year, but if you have a guy in net that can be really consistent and stabilize the front end, and you have that confidence on a guy who's in your crease, then it could make a lot of difference on a team like Tampa.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one thing I've always said about when people, I talk with fans about goaltending and the importance of it. And myself, you're a goaltender by trade, I'm a defenseman. So I always say, if I have a goaltender where I know that all I have to do is get him a look at every shot and he's going to stop it, that confidence it makes the job so much easier.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you wanted to talk about elite goaltenders. I mean, I run down the list of the elite goaltenders in the league, and without question, you'll ask the defenseman, do you feel confident with this guy between the pipes? They will say yes to every one of these names, and that would be Henrik Lundqvist, Pecorine, Tim Thomas. I include Carey Price, quite frankly, because I just think the poor kid's exhausted in Montreal. Talk about an awful hockey team. It hurts me to say it, but I wrote a piece on Montreal and how astonishingly bad they've been over the last almost 26 years since they won their cup, with Mats Naslund, as my uncle likes to call him. Mats Naslund, to be perfectly clear, was a top 10 scorer for the Canadiens. They haven't had a top 10 scorer since that cup run, by the way, in 1986. Not a single one, but that's, again, another story. And I think to go completely against Ken Holland's school of goaltending, Jimmy Howard has been unbelievable. Like, the kid was up for the Calder despite, and this is a couple of years ago, he was up for the Calder.
Correct.
Despite having been in the system for years. And now he's got his chance, and he has been outstanding for Detroit this year. And I truly think that this is a special goaltender. I didn't even realize this. Every NCAA record that matters is Jimmy Howard's.
Correct.
Goals a game, wins. Like, the guy is the NCAA kingpin of goaltending stats. Didn't know that until this year. I was doing some research on the guy prior to the All-Star game. Wow.
And one other guy I wanted to mention, that's in the West, and not necessarily because I am only, 30 miles from the arena, but when you look at Jonathan Quick and his development over these past few years, I mean, it's kind of bad that the team itself in Los Angeles, they can't really score, but Quick, I've watched him take his game from a couple of years ago when a lot of the local media were saying that, Jonathan Bernier was going to ultimately be the guy. And I had told him from that point, I said, when I look at Quick, I see another Mike Richter. That's who I see there. And then I see him elevate last year, and this year he comes in. They make those free agent acquisitions. They get Mike Richards, Simon Gagne, and it's almost as if Quick came in and just knew if he plays well, they got a real shot this year. Now, it hasn't necessarily turned out that way, but the play of Jonathan Quick and the way that something just clicks at a certain point, and you just come out on fire like that.
Talk about a dynamic goaltender. I'm glad you brought him up because I can talk about so many goaltenders so easily. You're absolutely right about him. He's got a great blend of technical ability because his slide and positioning is solid. But when he needs to explode into one of those desperation saves, oh my, or what is it, the Clippers enough? Oh my, or whatever he blabbers on about when Griffin gives a dunk. But
wow, you watch the Clippers in Toronto. They're really having some effect.
They kind of. When you got a guy that's exciting as Griffin, he makes the highlight reel an awful lot. So, Quick has shown that he is the true number one, and then you have a guy like Bernier who's sitting on the bench, and he's also in the discussion of guys that can be traded away because another team needs a bona fide young goaltender who can step in and be NHL ready. So there's a spoil of riches in the land of riches because it is the Kings, it's royalty. Yeah, I know that was a really cheap.
I got the pun, yeah.
But yeah, Jonathan Quick. When you talk about confidence in your goaltender, I remember what was it? Was it last season or 2 seasons ago? 51 save shutout performance against Detroit, and by the second period, when Detroit was completely annihilating LA in terms of shots on goal, and Quick was making save after save after save. Yeah. Obviously, I wasn't about to say it, but in the back of my mind, the bug was going, shut out, and he got it. Like 51 save shutout, only to be outdone by Craig Anderson, who made a 53 save shutout. Like, that's the difference of 2 shots, and that's not a whole heck
Definitely,
of a lot.
I remember that game, as a matter of fact. And you know what? Let me talk about someone. Let's go ahead and switch back out to the Eastern Conference goaltenders. And one guy, I've liked him because of the conditions under which he plays. I had expected him, and up until this season, it looks like he finally may get rewarded a little bit. But Henrik Lundqvist, I've always loved him as a goaltender, and the way that he plays, and the fact that he plays on a team that, let's go ahead and be quite honest, they quit on him every other game. Up until this season, they're playing a little bit more consistently, but they hung him out to dry so many times. And you'd think that he was going to do a Patrick Waugh, skate over to the bench and just tell Sather, you know what, this is my last game here, I'm through.
Talk about royalty. There's a reason that he earned the name King Henrik.
Yeah.
Because this guy, he's a big guy. Like, what, he's about 6'4", and he's 6'3", 6'4". He's no Anders Lindback. He's a big guy and plays deep in his net and gets away with it. But at the same time, he's great fundamentally. Obviously, his composure is outstanding. I think I've only seen him lose it once and smashed his stick, and I can't even remember the circumstance behind why it happened. But the guy has generally, over the last 3 years, been in the Vezina discussion.
Right.
It was 4 years ago now, almost, that he was up for the Vezina Award. I think this year, when you've got numbers like him in terms of shutouts, goals against, save percentage, wins, and pretty much, again, a reason why New York is competing, it's Henrik Lundqvist. The offense has been spread out. I was looking at the Rangers statistically. The offense has been pretty well spread out. I mean, when you got a guy like Brad Richards sitting third in team offense, and Gaborik, I think, is at the top with 47 points, Callahan being down with 42, then you see that there's some good offense. There's obviously Dan Girardi. The guy plays almost 30 minutes a game.
Right.
He may as well be another goaltender on the ice. It's incredible. But yeah, you bringing up Henrik Lundqvist, I'm glad you did. The guy's a beast.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad. It is good to see the Rangers. I'm not necessarily a Ranger fan as far as my fan side goes, but it's just good to see them playing well again and finally just showing him a little bit of love. What can I say? Because I've watched the Rangers over the years, and I'd see them do things. The turnovers in the neutral zone is stuff that when I was coaching hockey, I taught peewees not to do.
And yet here are guys going and doing it at the highest of highest levels. And I've done the same thing, where I'm scratching my head going, up the middle? Are you serious? Up the middle? Do you not know what jersey color your teammates are wearing? Up the middle?
Exactly. And I thought, in last year, we'll go ahead and just wrap up here in a little bit and then get into some of the more unpleasant part of the NHL. But last year I had said in that first round with the Rangers against the Capitals, if the Rangers had any guts and courage at all, they would have taken the Capitals out in that first round.
Well, it looks like this year they made, and watching last year, by the way, watching Marian Gaborik, if you can even use the word compete in the playoffs last year, I think it's an unfair word to Oxford Dictionary and Merriam-Webster. I mean, it's an affront to the word. But if he plays, I was going to bring this up when you were talking about best teams in the East, the Rangers clearly are, then he's got to compete, and he's got a guy who's won a cup in Brad Richards who can turn around and tell him, this is what you got to do, kid. And not that they're that much older than each other, but this is what we got to do to win, and you've got to come out and you have to compete. You have to live up to your stature as a goal scorer and a sniper that matters. And it's, when we talk about goaltending, it matters most during the playoffs.
Definitely. Now, let's go ahead and move on to, what I consider the unpleasant business side of the NHL, and that is in December of 2010, NHLPA, their new boss, their new head honcho, Donald Fehr. Now, I've heard his name pronounced Donald Fehr. Donald Fehr is what he was when he was the head of the baseball's players union. They wound up canceling the whole season. They lost the World Series. So should the NHL fans fear Donald, or is Fehr actually fair? What are we talking about here?
I'm concerned because, here's a guy who took America's pastime away from America and probably didn't lose a whole heck of a lot of sleep over it either. I don't know Donald Fehr or Fehr or however you want to pronounce it. At one iota, if he passed by me in the street, and even if I said, hey, Donald, he'd be like, hey, yeah, I'm on my way to work. Who are you?
Right.
But the same token, this is a guy who took away America's pastime. And now we're talking about hockey, where, again, we go back to when we started. This is not necessarily the first-tier sport in the U.S.
Exactly.
It's football, NASCAR, baseball, and even, before we went to air, we were talking about how finally the NHL, in numbers, at least on television, is coming close to, if not surpassing, the NBA. And as you pointed out, the last time this happened, there was a lockout.
Right,
and the NHL lost ground again.
Correct. So under Bettman, if we take a look at Bettman, now under Bettman we had the lockout of '94, we had the lost season in 05-06, and now we're facing up against possibly another work stoppage. And when he was confronted with this question last year about this time, and he just shrugged it off saying, there's no reason to talk about this now because, remember, the NFL has their CBA coming up. The NBA has their CBA coming up also. So there are still two other major sports which have to get their labor negotiations settled before they even get to us. So I think this is a little premature. That was Bettman's answer.
Yeah, they wanted to get a blueprint, very lawyer talk. Let's see what everybody else is doing. I could, like I said to you before, I could figure out how somebody else is paying off their car lease and then negotiate my own. Well, somebody else's car lease isn't my problem. My problem is mine. And I think it's unfair to compare yourself, one, to the NFL. Who compares themselves to the NFL? Goodell can basically do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, when he snaps his fingers, because that's how powerful the NFL is. The NFL can turn to the players and say, we're not having a season. The NFL's television contract is worth more than the entire National Hockey League. Let's not forget that.
Exactly.
And the NBA is a struggling business right now, and had they lost this season, I don't want to know where the National Basketball Association would be had this season been canceled. So then it comes to the NHL, where you're gaining momentum, television ratings are up, and now you're thinking of going up against Donald Fehr? Are you serious? The loopholes from the last contract, the last CBA was, okay, we can exploit it as owners and managers by giving these guys exorbitant long-term deals and weaning it off towards the end of their career. So there's that big loophole that everybody started having a cow over. So,
Exactly.
it's like any lawyer finding a way to get a drunk driver off. You don't exactly agree with it. You think it's horrible, but that's the legal system for you, and lawyers are paid to exploit the loopholes. Well, that's what general managers and capologists and lawyers did. They found a way around it. So now you're faulting them for doing it, and then you're faulting the owners for signing their checks. And I've always maintained this about the way hockey and sports are in general. Owners of teams at this point, this is their hobby. This is their tax write-off at the end of the year if a team loses money. It's not their sole source of revenue. You know, you've got these multi-millionaires and billionaires with their hobby is saying, I've got a hockey team. What do you have? Well, I have an NBA team and a hockey team.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. That's one of the things I've always said when I try to put it in, just to create some understanding with when I talk with fans about lockouts and things and work stoppages in sports. I said, remember, this is not like all of the automotive workers walking off the job. All you're doing to the owners really is you're taking the batteries out of their favorite toy. That's what you're doing. You're not shutting down their whole operation. They made their money somewhere else and are still making it somewhere else. That allows them to be in that elite group, that small group of people who own sports franchises. The franchise shutting down will not cripple the owners financially. And in many cases, it's the opposite.
Oh, yeah, of course. Hey, let's put it this way. I love this quote from Chris Rock, of all people. It says, define rich and define wealthy. Rich, Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The guy signing his check is wealthy.
Exactly.
So put that into perspective when you're thinking about how the owners will be able to turn around and say, okay, you want this? Try and have it. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to my regular job and still earn $1 billion this year. How about that? Oh, what will you earn? Oh, you'll go overseas and play for a lot less money? Have fun with that. Like that's my problem with this process, is that ultimately the fans lose out. You know, the fans lose out, period. But the players, I don't think, fully understand that they're dealing with an entity that does not have the investment that they do in the negotiation.
Well,
by and large, this is a tax write-off.
And one other thing is, with the players, though, you have to look at, and a lot of people, if you talk to just common people who have been in a strike situation, you're not really making any money, so to speak. But the players can go over, and it's a nice thing when there's a work stoppage and you've been locked out of your job to be able to go overseas and just peel off $1 million, $1.5 million while you're waiting for this whole thing to get settled, too. So maybe, you know, just from a worker standpoint, too, that being the players, they're not quite understanding because they're not doing the type of, you know, suffering, so to speak, that people normally do in a situation like that when you have a strike.
Well, I know. You can sit at home in your mansion with your... And this isn't for all players. Let's make this perfectly clear. There are roster players who are earning in the low to mid six figures, which, again, I'm pretty sure most of us wouldn't really shy away from if somebody offered us a contract like that in our particular line of work.
Exactly.
But at the same time, the elite players will be the ones taking away the jobs overseas, and the role players will be the guy going, I guess I'm going to go help my dad at the office or something, because that's what they have to fall back on, or help out with a hockey school or something to keep themselves going. I mean, I think one of the, I can't remember who it was training with the University of Michigan. Maybe it was Ryan Miller, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, it's just, it's a very, we could talk about this for an awful long time here, but it's a very complicated issue, the collective bargaining agreement. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty, what is it about ultimately? It's about money. Because let's face it, when they go out on their road trips, they're in a nice plane, they get a per diem. A lot of people don't know that. Hockey players get a per diem. Here's your lunch money for the day. That's not out of pocket.
Right, and it's not only $5 or anything.
Yeah. No, it's like a Hondo. Here's your Benjamin, and go have yourself a nice lunch.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of perks to being a hockey player. You don't pay for your equipment, you don't pay for your travel, you don't pay for your insurance. Although, you know, these things add up for the owner as well. So, what's there to lose for the owner? Not much. But for the person working in the arena, for the fan, from everybody else's perspective, it's a huge loss. And that's why I hate siding with owners. I truly do, because then they'll turn around and be the guy signing a guy like Ross to a $10 million deal. God love Pagula for wanting to make it happen in Buffalo. But this is what happened, and now the league really has to be very, very careful with losing yet another season. Because if they do, as we were discussing, it happened with the NBA, and the NBA could have suffered huge losses. With the NHL, they do not have that Americana in most regions of the U.S. They do, they have Canada to thank if hockey comes back, basically. That's the heart of the game. The appendages are in the U.S., so you can still live with a heart, even if the appendages are still kind of fluttering around and flailing around.
Well, just remember, a cockroach can live for 2 weeks without its head. So, you might want to go ahead and throw that out as a little bit of a metaphor there. But, let's look at this with the showdown, and real quick, we got to wrap up in like a minute here. But, so, who actually wins? I think one thing is with there being a CBA a salary cap already in place, I don't think that that will necessarily be an issue with Fehr wanting to remove the salary cap, because this whole thing with baseball, he made his name on never accepting a salary cap. And the NHL has that now. In fact, they lost the last season. I remember the outspoken Jeremy Roenick said, well, if we were going to accept a salary cap, why did we lose the whole season and then accept it? We should have negotiated that a year ago. Ironically, he was the only one who really spoke out about that. You'd think they would have been more vocal, and that's one of my issues with unions, is that you have, especially in a situation like this, you have the union saying something, and the players, they have to know that you can't tell the owners, look, no, you have to lose $80 million a year on your franchise.
Yeah, you're going to dictate that to a guy who, like we've been saying, has made a multi-billion-dollar fortune outside of the industry. It's a difficult situation, but yes, as you pointed out, and I'm glad you did, there is a salary cap in place. There is not in baseball. That's not the situation. It's comparing an apple to an orange. So thankfully, Fehr has to work within the parameters that's already been set forth. It's now a matter of tying it, as Bettman has said in years past and till this day, tying it to league revenues. But then what the NHL has going against it at this point is spouting off saying we're at an all-time high in terms of gate, in terms of television, so now the NHL is bragging that they're making all kinds of money, and then when it comes to the players saying, okay, this is what we want, the NHL is going to turn around and cry poor. So it's a real hard PR battle when you're going to wage one like this. The off-season, we're really going to be negotiating this, and here's hoping that we don't lose out on yet another season, because I'm not sure owners will say, look, this might be my hobby, but Gary, this is 3 work stoppages. I don't know too many heads of a company that are gonna survive another work stoppage.
Exactly.
Like this.
All right, Lonnie. I'll tell you what, we're out of time now. It's been truly a pleasure finally having you on the show. And hey, if possible, we'll have to make this kind of a regular thing. I really appreciate all of your knowledge and insight there from Eastern Canada.
Well, I appreciate being on, and yes, it would be an absolute pleasure to be back on Inside Sports. Charles, thank you so very much for having me on, man.
All right, fantastic. So, everybody, I'm Charles E. Smith, Jr. for Lonnie Schwartz and Inside Sports. This has been Talkin' Hockey, and we'll see you next time. Thanks to everyone for joining us.